Good evening, and welcome to the July 1st Wednesday night Bible class of the Boone Church of Christ. How do you deal with unfair criticism? A father, son, and their donkey were traveling from one village to another. The boy walked while the man rode the donkey. The father overheard a bystander say, "That's a shame. Look how that man is making that poor boy walk." Not wanting to be the object of criticism, the father and son changed places. The boy rode the donkey while the man walked. He then heard a woman comment, "Look how that boy on the donkey is making that poor man walk." So the father and son both climbed onto the donkey, and as they traveled down the road, someone said, "Look how that man and boy are making that poor donkey suffer." Upon hearing that, they both got off and walked. Then people remarked, "Look at that stupid man and boy. They're walking when they could be riding that donkey." No matter what you do, someone will find fault. When criticism is unfair to begin with, it seems like you just can't win. I don't know anyone who likes to be unfairly criticized. Do you? Yes, constructive criticism does exist, but really, it's quite rare. Even constructive criticism can become negative if it lacks the appropriate amount of positive affirmations to go along with it. So how does the Christian handle negative and unfair criticism? We're continuing to talk this evening about developing a heart for God. And we're looking at David's heart and his life to better understand what type of heart pleases God. Tonight we're going to talk about developing a heart of forgiveness. And I hope you see the connection, because unfair criticism can be very difficult to forgive. It takes a heart of forgiveness to deal with unfair criticism. We're going to read about David's encounter with a man named Shimei. And this was a difficult situation for David. It certainly would have tested David's patience. So let's talk about when the rocks of unfair criticism come flying. We're going to begin in 2 Samuel chapter 16, and we're going to read verses 5 through 8. As King David came to Bahurim, a man came out of the village cursing them. It was Shimei, son of Gera, from the same clan as Saul's family. He threw stones at the king and the king's officers and all the mighty warriors who surrounded him. "Get out of here, you murderer, you scoundrel," he shouted at David. "The Lord is paying you back for all the bloodshed in Saul's clan. You stole his throne, and now the Lord has given it to your son Absalom. At last you will taste some of your own medicine, for you are a murderer." You know, there are going to be people that want to hurt you. They'll say whatever they feel they have to in order to hurt you. That's what Shimei was doing to David. What were Shimei's accusations? He said that David was responsible for the death of Saul and his sons. He wasn't. That responsibility fell squarely on Saul's shoulders and was due to his actions and disobedience with God. He said that David had taken Saul's throne by force. He didn't. God removed Saul and put David in his place. He said that God had placed Absalom on the throne in place of David. God didn't. Absalom took it himself. Every one of Shimei's accusations against David were false, but that doesn't mean that they didn't hurt. Now, I haven't mentioned the background in this story yet, but knowing David's situation as he was dealing with this encounter with Shimei will help us to better understand his emotional state during this encounter. David's kingdom had been overthrown. He had been on the throne. He had taken Saul's place, but something had happened. And David, in this situation that we're reading about in 2 Samuel chapter 16, was escaping the city. And that's because he'd been betrayed. But he wasn't being betrayed by just anyone. It was his own son, Absalom, who had betrayed him. How hard would that be, to have your own child betray you? David was experiencing the sting of betrayal, and he was emotionally and physically exhausted from all of this. He was also heartbroken and humiliated. How would you feel? What would you do? You know, negative and unfair criticism hurts. It belittles and destroys. Self-righteous rock throwers do a lot of damage. They damage relationships and they create an environment of hostility. People who do nothing but unfairly criticize foster gossip and distrust. They create emotional upheaval and a spiritually unhealthy environment. They hurt people and they harm the church. How should we deal with unfair, negative criticism? How would we have handled Shimei? How would David handle him? And what can we learn from David about the way that he handled the situation with Shimei? David took the high road with him. And in order to do that, David had to recognize some things. First, David recognized that he too had sinned in his life. Listen to 2 Samuel chapter 16, verses 9 through 14. Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Abishai, son of Zeruiah, demanded, let me go over and cut off his head. No, the king said, who asked your opinion, you sons of Zeruiah? If the Lord has told him to curse me, who are you to stop him? Then David said to Abishai and to all his servants, my own son is trying to kill me. Doesn't this relative of Saul have even more reason to do so? Leave him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has told him to do it. And perhaps the Lord will see that I am being wronged and will bless me because of these curses today. So David and his men continued down the road, and Shimei kept pace with them on a nearby hillside, cursing and throwing stones and dirt at David. This went on for a long time. Listen to this next verse. The king and all who were with him grew weary along the way. So they rested when they reached the Jordan River. Shimei was wrong, but David knew that he had made mistakes too. His sin with Bathsheba for one. His own rage at Nabal for another. David did something that is really very difficult to do, especially in the heat of the moment. David engaged in spiritual self-examination. Spiritual examination requires honesty if we're going to see ourselves, see others, and see God clearly. We're not the first to experience unfair and unjust criticism, and it won't be the last time we'll experience it either. So when we suffer unjust criticism, we need to be able to see with spiritual clarity. The second thing David recognized was the importance of yielding his will to God's will. In verse 11 of 2 Samuel chapter 16, then David said to Abishai and to all his servants, my own son is trying to kill me. Doesn't this relative of Saul have even more reason to do so? Let him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has told him to do it. In David's mind, what Shimei was doing was appropriate. In David's mind, although it seemed unfair and unjust, and he knew it, he felt like it was something that God was doing and had a hand in. And he made a choice that he was going to yield to the Lord's will. You and I have to be able to do the same thing. The third thing David recognized was that God had been merciful to him, and it was God's mercy that shaped David's decisions. Let's now read 2 Samuel chapter 19, verses 15 through 23. So the king started back to Jerusalem. And I'm going to pause here because we were last reading in 2 Samuel chapter 16. You remember that's when David was fleeing the city because Absalom had taken control, and Absalom was seeking his own father's life. David was escaping the city. He'd run into Shimei. Shimei was throwing rocks and dirt on him, saying all these horrible things to David. Unfair, unjust. That's the last we had read. Now, 3 chapters later, a lot has changed. Absalom is now gone, and David is coming back to assume the throne. So, the king started back to Jerusalem, and when he arrived at the Jordan River, the people of Judah came to Gilgal to meet him and escort him across the river. Shimei, son of Gera, he was there. The man from Bahurim and Benjamin hurried across with the men of Judah to welcome King David. 1,000 other men from the tribe of Benjamin were with him, including Ziba, the chief servant of the house of Saul, and Ziba's 15 sons and 20 servants. They rushed down to the Jordan to meet the king. They crossed the shallows of the Jordan to bring the king's household across the river, helping him in every way they could. As the king was about to cross the river, Shimei fell down before him. "My lord the king, please forgive me," he pleaded. "Forget the terrible thing your servant did to you when you left Jerusalem. May the king put it out of his mind. I know how much I sinned. That is why I have come here today, the very first person in all Israel to greet my lord the king." Then Abishai, son of Zeruiah, said Shimei should die, for he cursed the Lord's anointed king. "Who asked your opinion, your sons of Zeruiah?" King of Israel, or brother David exclaimed. "Why have you become my adversary today? This is not a day for execution, for today I am once again the king of Israel." Then turning to Shimei, David vowed, "Your life will be spared." You know, this was the second opportunity that David had to have Shimei killed. Abishai would have done it both when they were leaving Jerusalem and escaping the city, as well as when they were returning to Jerusalem for David to assume the throne. It's interesting that David had two opportunities. You know, with Saul, David had two opportunities to kill Saul too, but he didn't do it. God had been merciful to David. David recognized it, so David chose to extend that same mercy to Shimei. So what are some lessons for us in this story? First, there will be people who want to hurt us in this life. Unfair criticism will come your way, and it hurts. It's not right, but it happens. And as Christians, how we respond to unfair criticism and unjust treatment is important. It's important to others. It's very important to God. And it should be important to us as well. Second, unfair criticism gives us an opportunity to let God's light of love and forgiveness shine in our hearts towards others. Yes, it's unfair. People who want to hurt you will hurt you. But when you respond to them in kindness and in love and forgiveness, you are heaping good upon evil. And that is something that God says will shine a light on His love and His mercy as we reflect His love and His mercy for others in our hearts. But to take advantage of this opportunity, there are some things that are required from us. And we learn these things from David. First, we have to be able to honestly examine ourselves and realize that we too are sinful people. Second, we must accept God's will and yield to it. And that means responding to people with love and with kindness and with gentleness. We have to recognize how merciful God has been to us as well. And we should commit to extending mercy to other people. David's reaction was not about Shimei, and it wasn't about himself, even though he was hurt by it. David realized that only God matters in the final analysis. First and foremost, it's about God, and God should matter in our lives too. And if pleasing Him is our focus, then all of the other important aspects of our lives will fall into the appropriate place. So let's commit to developing hearts of forgiveness in our lives. Let's commit to extending the mercy to others that God has shown to us.